last thing I want to mention, not the last thing, but the last political thing, then I'm going to mention something else. um, is this debate between Victoria Hammett and Michael Knowles. Now, if you do not know Victoria Hammett, she is a TikTok personality, and she's a hard Democrat, liberal person. She's one of the people that the White House actually briefed in the Ukraine situation. I've stitched her, replied to quite a few of her things before. Just kind of the typical sort of leftist, but she had a debate with Michael Knowles on abortion that was like, I think was more than an hour and a half, but I did watch the whole thing today, and she kept bodily autonomy was her main argument. I think there's so many things that don't work out for bodily autonomy, especially since she mentioned like to the point of viability. And I don't know if that actually means that she'd be willing to ban abortion past the point of viability. But she did mention it. And I thought that was so weird because, in my opinion, if bodily autonomy is your argument, what does it matter? What viability? Because it's still in your body. It's still in your body. So I went into a big Twitter thread about it. I'll post probably it all on my site, what I said, like an article. But I want to talk about this analogy that she continuously kept bringing up throughout the entire debate. She kept going back to this analogy. So I want to go ahead and watch it with you guys, play with you guys, and then give my take on it.
Their mind, and in order to express their regret, they kill a child. Does anyone think that that is moral or just?
I again wouldn't consider it. I wouldn't consider it killing a child. Let me give you an analogy to kind of help demonstrate this point better. Let's say you're driving and you're driving safely. You're not.
Wait, before we continue on, that tail end was part of another conversation before she went into the analogy. But she did admit that it was alive. She did admit that it was human. A child is just like someone under the age of puberty, or you could mean it in sort of a relation term, like I am 32, soon to be 33 on June the 10th, and it's my mommy's birthday, and doesn't matter how old I am still her child. So it would be killing a child. It would be the mother's child, regardless. So but I don't think she considers it killing a child because it is not sentient. She said it in another part, and she mentioned a few other things, but these are arbitrary lines that people make so they can just really discriminate against an unborn human being. So they didn't break down sentience and other stuff like that in the debate, really, but I just want to add my 2 cents before we go into the analogy.
Not drunk, you're not driving recklessly, and a stoplight is out. You know, some form of protection fails you. It doesn't keep you safe. You accidentally hit someone, and that person is now in critical condition. And let's say that there is some sort of procedure where you could hook yourself up to this person for 9 months to sustain their life. Should the government be able to legally force you to hook yourself up to this person, give them your bodily resources for 9 months, have you be at risk for lifetime long complications as a result of this procedure? Should the government be able to legally force you to do that? And if you would decide not to do that, would that be considered murder?
So what you've just described is a version of what's called the violinist argument, right? And the violinist argument is probably the most popular argument for abortion. I think it's the most widely printed philosophical essay of all time. And it's a version of this, which is one day you wake up, you go to sleep, you wake up, and you're attached via a tube to the greatest violinist in the world. And the Musical Society of America has kidnapped you. They said, I'm very sorry we had to kidnap you, but your kidneys are the best kidneys to keep this violinist alive. So you can unplug yourself, but if you unplug yourself, the violinist will die. And if you keep yourself plugged in for 9 months, then the violinist will live. That's basically the argument you're making, right?
No, I was making the argument that I said about the driving and the stoplight.
Oh, okay, but we're changing the details here. But the substance of that argument would remain essentially the same. I imagine you're familiar with the violinist argument, are you not?
I am.
So how would your version differ from the violinist argument?
My version differs because in the driving analogy, you are choosing to drive, you understand the risks of driving, you understand that you could get into a car accident, right? And so this is where it becomes more comparative to consensual sex.
But then.
And so.
Sure, but so, okay, I see that distinction, but that would seem to weaken the argument for abortion, would it not? Because you're all consenting to the rules of the road.
I think even in a situation where you understand that driving could realistically lead to a car crash, you could injure someone every time you get into a car. I think that even understanding those risks, you should not be forced to hook yourself up to someone in this analogy. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So I thought it was funny. She's like, no, I was talking about making the argument that I made. Okay, if you get into a car, in Michigan, I don't know what all the rules and stuff and laws everywhere are, but you can't even. There is an obligation to each other if there's some kind of injury. No, it's not physically hooking someone up to your organs and whatnot, but it is illegal to drive without insurance. You are supposed to have insurance on your car. Now, there's people who get away with it. It's called riding dirty. I guess you have to live in the fear of the police, like running your plates and being like, bro, where's your insurance? You're supposed to have insurance because in the event that you are in some kind of car accident, someone has to pay for that. Is the obligation that you have to be hooked up to your organs and stuff? No, but she keeps making this analogy because she's like, can the government force you to give your organs and your nutrients and your life force and blah blah blah? But that's not what happens when you're pregnant. No one forces you to do that. No one forces you to do that. The only force is if some, as far as like getting pregnant, is if you are unfortunately, horrifically, terribly awful thing, if you are raped. But everyone knows, not everyone knows maybe, but that's a less than 1% statistic as far as when you're talking about abortion. 99% of the encounters which ultimately lead to abortion are consensual. So you're like 99% of it is consensual. And so you consent in the sexual act, which she relates to driving a car. Someone passes a stoplight or whatever, and I guess that's the not having contraceptives, or someone condom breaking or birth control failed or something, and now you're pregnant. Are you supposed to now hook up your life force to this child and provide for them? The government doesn't make you do that. A stranger doesn't make you do that. I can't make you do that. That is natural. That is natural. But the child would not exist at all if you had not engaged in the action of procreation. That's just the facts. So it's a stupid analogy. The violinist analogy is stupid as well. No one forces you to be hooked up to the child. That is something that happens naturally after you engage in an action that is biologically designed to do what happened, what resulted in the baby. It's all natural. It is a terrible analogy. Absolutely terrible. And they just think they gotcha. And by the way, one thing I want to say about pro-choicers and these analogies and stuff, and I know a lot of people use different analogies in debates, but it's so often, especially on TikTok, where people will be like, this is the best argument ever, like pro-choice argument ever. And I just think and there was one viral video where the person like gave an analogy, and it was like there's a burning clinic with all these embryos and a 3-year-old child or something. Are you going to save the 3-year-old, or are you going to save 1,000 embryos? And people are like, they probably saved the child, but that doesn't mean the embryos aren't alive. It's like, how are you going to store them? Are you going to be able to get them out safely? Are they even going to be implanted? Like, there's some real big ethical questions about IVF. Your instincts see a child, you're going to get that child. What would it matter if there was Victoria and 10 of her friends versus my nephew? I would get my nephew, like, and they would unfortunately not be here. Like, what does that matter? It doesn't make you not human. But those are the sort of analogies that people use and think that they're just great arguments. So anyway, I think it's really funny that people that on the pro-choice side, people will use all these analogies and hypotheticals and super rare situations, and that's their evidence. But it's like, you have to use these fictions And I suppose you have to do that when what you advocate for, the reality of it, is so barbaric and cruel. Because the best argument for pro-lifers is actually it's a human being and you shouldn't kill it. Like, it's that simple. It's that simple. And you need an analogy about a car crash that doesn't work to justify your point. No one is forcing you. You have no one to blame but yourself and your partner, whoever you slept with, whether it was a longtime partner or somebody you met in a bar. Someone I was arguing with who's pro-choice was arguing for abortions for one night stands. Like, that's something we should be able to do. So, which, hey, if that's your stance, you should be able to argue for that, for the woman who wants to, abort her child out of spite of her boyfriend because he caught her cheating on him. And yes, I'm aware of women who've done that. So if your argument is bodily autonomy, then yeah, you got to defend all those scenarios. It's just such a really, really bad argument. And they kept going back to it. Like, this is why I brought up the car analogy. This is why I brought up the car analogy. And Michael just never quite connected with it. To him, it didn't seem to make sense. And maybe it doesn't make sense because no one forces you. The government's not forcing you to have the baby that you made. I mean, that would be like if you want to get out of your marriage, is it forced because there are laws against killing? No, there are other options other than murdering your husband, but no one's forcing you to be in your marriage, and no one certainly forced you to marry them. Like, there's all these decisions that you made, and there's other, if you don't want to, have parenthood, I mean, to continue your marriage, there's other options besides murder, homicide, whatever. No one's forcing you. But they say forced birth, which abortion is forced birth. Like, once you're pregnant and the child is there, you're already a parent, right? It's going to pass through you, and either it's going to pass through you as a live, living baby, or unfortunately, if there's some kind of miscarriage, or if you have some kind of abortion, but it's going to pass through you. So abortion is actually forced birth and homicide. So there's that. So they keep talking about deny the resources. And some people are like, especially because maybe I hear it's like 90% of abortions are maybe with the pill, like they're early. So people argue that that's I don't know, not as brutal because it's like the pills that they take basically cuts off what it takes to make like the placenta and whatever nutrients and stuff that the child is getting, and then it suffocates or starves to death, and then you take another pill and then it forces it out of you, sometimes in pieces, by the way. And I'm sure Victoria knows Chelsea Hart, and she had an abortion. That's another TikTok star. She had like 1 million viewers, but she had an abortion and opened up, and she's still pro-choice, I assume. But she talked about the trauma of her abortion and seeing her baby in pieces. So and how painful it was once that you take the second pill and it forces you to have the contractions. And she was in a pool of sweat and stuff. And I understand not everyone may have a traumatic sort of abortion, but just letting you know, they can come out dismembered even if you take the pill. So some people will argue that they're not killing the child, they're just denying them resources. I know someone who set their house on fire. And I know arson is like not allowed and other stuff like that. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you could just set your property on fire. Like, is that a wrong thing to do? Well, the reason why she set the house on fire is because the cheating husband was inside. So why are you denying the child nutrients? Is it because you miss them so much because you're like, I need every bit of my nutrients? Or is it because you're trying to take out the baby? Let's be for real. I think a better analogy, and I'm not a fan of like using analogies in these debates because I don't feel like you really need to, and I feel like they really get off the tracks. But I think a far better analogy than what Victoria was saying, or the violinist one, is, let's say you kidnap a person and no one else can get to them, and you've been giving them, they're in a locked cell or whatever, and you just give them a little bit of food, you know, and then you decide, I don't want to do that anymore, and they die. Did you kill them? I think so. Because no one else can take care of the baby you made. No one else can do that. And you may think it's unfair. It's just human evolution, the nature of humanity that's been going on for as long as our existence. I'm sorry that you just think it's so unfair, life. I think it's unfair that rain is wet and so cold and my hair frizzes up. It was raining today. But sometimes life is unfair and you have to suck it up, okay? Especially when you make a baby. There's just no justification that she gave in the entire debate that justifies taking the baby's life. But you can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to deny you nutrients and I'm not killing you. So I think the prisoner, kidnapping the prisoner, because they only exist because of your actions, whether you meant to get pregnant or not, I mean. So you're the only one who can take care of them. They're in a secluded place. No one else can get to them. And their survival solely depends on you continuing to feed them. And you're like, you know what? I'm sick of walking to the kitchen and getting you water and bread or whatever. So I'm gonna call it a day. I'm gonna let you just starve to death. And once you're dead, I'm gonna get rid of the body. I think that's a more appropriate analogy than a car crash. So it was interesting debate. I don't know how interesting it'll be for everyone else if you're unaware of like who they are, but there's just a lot of not great points that I see people trying to make in these debates, and she's probably one of the better ones that I've seen try to debate this issue. But y'all ain't got good reasons, bro. Y'all ain't got good reasons. And there are anecdotal stories that I have heard that are more sympathetic, but just the bodily autonomy argument doesn't make sense, because you use your bodily autonomy, you exercise your bodily autonomy when you engage in sex. And if you are too dumb to know that sex leads to pregnancy, you are too dumb to be having sex. But you know what? It's not a lack of education isn't the issue, because 86% of 86% of abortions are from unwed women, FYI. But more than 80% of abortions are from women aged 20 to 40. So I don't think the issues are lack of education. Like people like, we need more sex education. I'm like, no, we don't. No, and more sex education really isn't the answer if the sex education is consent to sex isn't consent to pregnancy. That's not what we need, because you are instilling a total lack of accountability within women. So you're not part of the solution. You're actually the problem, in which Victoria actually said in this debate. And that's something that people say often now. That is the phrase that people regurgitate. Consent to sex isn't consent to pregnancy. But anyway, it's not lack of education. I don't think it's lack of finances, really, because in the US we have one of the highest rates of abortion in the world. I don't mean developed world, I just mean the world, period. Just the world, period. And this is a land of opportunity. Even if you are in dire financial straits, that does not mean that is going to be your life story. Life is not linear. You have different changes all the time. You can have the right TikTok or Instagram post and it can change your life. Someone can take a news clip of you saying something and make a remix song, and it could change your life. You could make There was someone who got famous for doing a man bun. You know, so many things can change your life. There's so many different opportunities, and there's so much. Well, how much money did people give to BLM? And it was a freaking scam, pretty much. These people buying houses and all sorts of lands, funneling it to their friends and their families and baby daddies and all kinds of stuff. And people just gave money hand over fist to these folks. Can you imagine if Kamala Harris had tweeted out like women in need so they could feel better and maybe keep their pregnancies, rather than tweeting out, hey, give to the Minnesota Freedom Fund so they can break out people who are rioting and protesting? Which, by the way, the Minnesota Freedom Fund doesn't care what you did. They just don't like cash bail. So they'll get out anyone, including if you were accused of murder. And by the way, some of the people that they actually bailed out did commit murder. Our problem is that there's a lack of commitment and a lack of responsibility. That's what it is. That's what it is. So people talk about root causes. I think Victoria contributes to the root causes, honestly, in my opinion.